You are a 5 times TEDx speaker.
Right.
You go all around speaking professionally. And I mean, you've created Blue Talks in Canada. You have books. What is it that you would say got you into speaking in the first place? How did you wind up doing that?
So this is a story I've shared many times, and sometimes I like bringing new stories into the mix, but I will say the story because I think it's important. Is I get tricked into it performing stand-up comedy one night. I won't take us down this much of a path, but I'll tell you I was battling hypochondria and generalized anxiety for 4 years at that point.
How bad did it get?
I call vitamin P, which is purpose and passion. When you find that, when I say it's a vitamin you can't buy in the store, but when you take it, it changes everything. I don't believe you can jump from, most people can't jump from nothing, I don't have meaning, to now I have purpose. I think there's a gateway, which is finding a passion and starting to pursue that passion, and eventually the purpose reveals itself. Well, I think people too think, I don't have the energy to do both, I'm already working, what have you. The irony is that if you go do that thing you're passionate about, it'll give you more energy.
It fuels the other thing. Yeah.
Oldish. The show where age-old questions meet new-age answers. With your hosts, Randy Spelling, Brian Austin Green, and Sharna Burgess.
Corey Poirier, welcome to Oldish.
Thank you so much, Randy. And you just pronounced my name, as I said off air, better than me. And you even did a better job this time. So
I was nervous. I was sweating a little bit over that one.
All right.
Okay, so let's call it like we see it first, because people are going to know. So right away, you're Canadian.
Indeed. Yes, indeed.
Where in Canada do you live?
I always have to say it in reference to Nova Scotia because nobody ever knows. So I'll say Prince Edward Island.
Prince
and
Edward
people say,
Island.
where in Rhode Island do you
They
live?
have good muscles there.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so I get hit with Rhode Island.
Born
Point
and
Island.
raised there.
Yes. And it's about 3 hours east of Nova Scotia for those.
A boat, you see? You
Yeah.
hear,
Yeah,
So
you got
people
it.
hear the little things and they go, wait, is he Canadian? Now you know. You don't have to guess on your own.
Yeah. Grew up in a tiny, tiny little island that I always describe. It's like Hawaii 6-7 months a year, and it's like Alaska 4 or 5 months a year.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's that extreme.
Yeah, like I know it's different Fahrenheit, Celsius, but we're like, we can get minus 38.
What?
Yeah.
Fahrenheit?
No, Celsius.
Celsius.
So that is...
I don't even know the conversion. I
Still,
just know
that's
it's cold.
Yeah.
That's cold.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's real cold.
So that's extreme.
Yeah.
So you have both extremes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Not by choice.
Okay.
Like,
Of course not by choice.
My wife continually tries to talk me into moving to California, like probably every third day.
Does she really?
Yeah, she loves it here.
So what holds you there?
Yeah. Yeah. What does hold you in that weather and that, because that's a lifestyle choice. That is like, I always say to people when they're like, oh, the seasons in California and you don't get them. And like my view is always like, well, we have seasons. We just kind of skip the shitty ones. So it's like, it's pretty temperate all the time. Like it doesn't dip below this or go above this.
And your thinking probably is, I'm okay with that. Like, I'm okay if we don't get all the seasons.
I'm totally okay with that. Yeah, I don't want to be snowed in, and I'm good.
I'm not with you. I like
fine.
seasons. I love seasons.
So let's just agree to disagree.
So
what holds you there?
for me, and this is where sometimes it's tough because I get why I shouldn't hold on for this reason, but my mother, I'm an only child. My mother's an only child. And we have 2 kids now, which she never thought ever that she would have grandchildren. I mean, I waited till we talked earlier about this, 42.
Yeah.
And there was no sign I was going to have kids. And so now that I have them, I just feel somewhat guilty if I were to move full time that far
be
away.
like, hey, I'm glad I get you. You have grandkids now. See ya. Like, we'll see you once a year.
Yeah.
I get it. I understand
I
that.
totally get that.
And Shelly's 2 parents are gone now. And my father lives there, but I never see him. So he's not really in their life. So my mom's like their last thing. And when they lost their papa, like 9 months later, my son still can't say papa. He literally says to my wife, your dad. Like, I'm using your dad's phone. And so just the thought of us leaving and my mom now not seeing him, to him, it'd be like losing her. So that's kind of the only main thing that's holding me right now.
So was that just a devastating experience for him then?
Yeah, I just think for her and him, like it would kill her or crush her if we were that far away. Yeah. And also I think the other side is I get to travel so much that I still get the best of both worlds. Like I'm on the road a week and a half, 2 weeks every month, all year round. So I get to experience all the places anyway and still got that connection to home. But Shelly has struggled with a couple things. One, and she'd be open to me saying this. One, it's her wanting to move just in general because of the weather. Mm-hmm. But the reason she wants to move because of the weather is she has seasonal depression.
Oh, yeah.
And so when it's gray and cold, she goes through bouts of depression. So for her, if she was here, like this trip, she's like happy the whole time.
She's feeling good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's tough.
So you said you were on the road a couple weeks out of the month, right? So you are a 5 times TEDx speaker. Right. You go all around speaking professionally. And, I mean, you've created Blue Talks in Canada. You have books. What is it that you would say got you into speaking in the first place? How did you wind up doing that?
So this is a story I've shared many times, and sometimes I like bringing new stories into the mix, but I will say the story because I think it's important, is I get tricked into it performing stand-up comedy one night. That's literally how I got into speaking.
Performing stand-up comedy.
Yeah, I know. And how do you get tricked? Right,
right, totally. So,
and that's the thing. People are like, what do you mean tricked? And I legit can say I was tricked. So what happened was I had a stage play in a fringe festival. It was called the Atlantic Fringe Festival. And I wrote and directed the play. And I never wanted to be on the stage. I always thought I was going to be a writer. I wrote my first song at 12. Okay. I thought I was going to be songwriter, book writer, screenwriter, but never seen. That was my dream, not being on stage. And I did this play, 5-day run. One of the actors sprained his ankle halfway through. He was the lead actor. His name was Joe. The play was called From Rags to Rags. And he sprained his ankle. And I realized that if Joe / Sean, his real name, has a sprained ankle and he's got to do costume changes, he needs more time. So I had to write new parts into the play. And guess what? All the actors were full. They couldn't take any more parts. Guess who else knows the lines to the play? The only other person that knows it is the writer-director who doesn't want to be on stage. So what I did was I dressed myself up in a Hulk Hogan t-shirt and a wig, and I walked out.
Wait, in an actual Hulk Hogan t-shirt? Or
not
like
the yellow one he ripped open.
Right, okay.
But like one that said Hulk Hogan.
That was the tank top.
Yeah,
yeah,
I didn't. That would have been better.
The Hulkamania shirt.
That would have been epic if I went out there and tried to rip the shirt open. But no, just a regular like wrestling shirt, Hulk Hogan shirt, and a wig. And I wasn't even looking at the audience, and the sweat was coming down. Like that's how terrified I was. And I had 2 parts, and I remember one was a busker. The main character was a busker, and I was like a audience member. And I remember by heart I wrote, I don't know why I wrote this line, and it's kind of ironic. I told you guys I seen Bob Dylan last night. Well, the line I wrote was the guy would keep going up to him and say, "Play more Dylan," and then throw pennies at him to the busker. That was the character that I wrote in, and I was that character. And so because I was that character, but because I didn't want to be on stage, I fulfilled my obligations. But as soon as I was done, I went to one of the actors, another actor, and said, "How do you think I could get over this in case this happens again?" And he said, "I don't know if this is the answer, but I'm going to a stand-up comedy workshop at the local university. Want to come with me? It's a 2-week workshop." And I said, "That sounds horrible."
Right. No thanks.
And I said, "Sure, I'm in." I went the opposite route. My thinking was this: I don't have to get on stage just because I go to a workshop. I can just go to the workshop and learn how to write, because that's what I wanted to do. But I went for 2 weeks, and the third week it was supposed to be done, but the third week he said, the guy who's running it said, "Let's fill a club with people and let's bring in some comics and then we'll study them like a clinic and learn from them." And so we went to the show. It's about 5 minutes to 8. We go to, his name was Guy. We said, "Guy, where are the comics? Does anybody else beside me see where this is going?" He turned to us and said, "What do you mean? You guys are the comics." So we found out with 5 minutes notice.
Be mortified.
No material, not told to have material.
But yeah.
And his thinking was
on and go.
And his thinking was
trial by
the
fire.
people that are, yeah, exactly.
Tough love right there.
Yeah, 15 people, 8 walked out the front door. I've never seen them again in my life. I went to the bathroom to try to find the exit window. Like, they were gone. Just never said a word. See ya. And I went to the bathroom and I'm like, okay, I got to find a way out. And I looked for a window, and the bathroom had the seals windows, almost like jail.
Yeah.
And I was like, I can't leave this way. Now I got to walk it in front of people. And I went out and I was standing against the bar and I was like, I'm going to leave. And then I had this weird vision. I've never had a vision in my life until that point. I had a vision of me as an older dude sitting on the stage, or looking at the stage, watching these younger people perform and saying that was going to be me one night. I should have done it. And the regret was worse than going on the stage. So that's how I say I got tricked into performing stand-up comedy.
And how did it go?
Yeah,
Horrible.
I was just going to say,
Horrible.
you just bombed.
Yeah, I mean, I jokingly now say the second joke, I think I saw a tumbleweed go by the stage. But honestly, I went on the stage, told a joke. And my jokes, by the way, what I did was I just moved across the country. And I've been telling my friends these stories. And I thought, these are funny stories. So I'm going to try these. And what I found from comedy and found out about comedy is your story that you tell a friend, it doesn't work the same way on a stage. And so I tried to tell the story / joke and nothing. And then I jumped into a second joke because I figured I've already done the work. I'm up here. And more dead silence. And that's when I jokingly say, I think a tumbleweed went by the stage. Finally, guy that got us into this mess calls me over, gives me a schmuck in the back of the head, and he says, you idiot. What are you doing it there? We haven't even turned the mic on yet to start the show.
Oh.
That was my start.
Wait, so how the fuck did that lead to what it is you do now? Being a motivational speaker and I don't. Please connect those dots for me because I don't get it.
I can connect the dots quicker than that whole story, but that story probably had to set the tone for when I say how I get started. That's truly what happened. I went to work the next day after the comedy bombing, we got the mic turned on, by the way. I told the same two jokes again, and they bombed again.
So
I think I'm the only comedian
twice.
Yeah,
and you were like, yeah, it doesn't work either way.
It doesn't work. Yeah,
Right.
I might be the only comic that's ever done that. Bombed twice in 10 minutes with the same material. But I went to work the next day, and people are like, "Did you meet someone last night? You got like a different energy or something about you. You just like have a hop in your step." And I had no idea at the time, but it was like I was discovering something I was passionate about for the first time. So I won't take us down this much of a path, but I'll tell you I was battling hypochondria and generalized anxiety for 4 years at that point.
How bad did it get?
The hypochondria? Because it was worse than the anxiety. The anxiety was just I was anxious all the time and couldn't sleep and stuff. The hypochondria, and I'll get back to how, because I want to connect the dots.
Okay, yeah.
But the hypochondria started was I was in a doctor's office one day for something that was routine, and I picked up a magazine and I started reading about Michael J. Fox being diagnosed with Parkinson's at a young age. And I'm like, how's that possible? I thought it was an older person's disease. And all of a sudden, I read the whole article and I read how the symptoms started, what the symptoms were. Didn't understand because I was already anxious.
But then right away you were
Boom.
like, oh my God, I have some similar things. And then your mind starts fucking painting a picture of,
Yeah, it was. And the best part is I didn't have the any of the symptoms when I read it. But the next day, I'm like,
of course,
oh my God, it's starting just like him. Like it's starting.
Yeah.
There's no weird scenario here that it's starting the very next day I read about it, the exact same symptoms. But it's so wild when you have something like hypochondria, how you can't see the obvious. Like, by the way, as soon as I went and got tested for Parkinson's, like I remember they got me to do stuff like this. Can you do this? Which I can still do now.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I can't do it.
Oh my God.
Like what's going on? And then they did all the tests and then they're like, it's conclusive. You don't have it. And I trust it. Like I accepted that. But then the next day I'm like, maybe it's MS. It was just like for 2 years.
Wow.
Every day.
Gosh. So it was just, you were just in a place in your life of like creating a new thing that you were now struggling with for
Absolutely.
2 years.
For 2 years. And I remember, I don't know why, maybe there's strength in not Misery, but Community. But I remember I watched the movie. I forget what it's called. I want to say The Switch, but it was Jason Bateman. And him and Jennifer Aniston, she wanted to have a baby, and he dropped the sperm, so then he refilled it, and then ended up becoming, you ever seen it?
No.
Became the father of this baby that she had, but
Yeah.
nobody knew, and he finally eventually realized it. Well, he was a hypochondriac, and he said to the kid, well, I can't do that because I'm a hypochondriac. And I remember they were both sitting in front of this shark thing, almost like SeaWorld. And the kid said, what's hypochondria? And he said, well, and he explained it. And the kid said, that's what I have. And I don't know why it was so much comfort. That I always think about that when I think of hypochondria, because it's like I never heard people talk about it. It seemed like I had this weird disease that nobody else had, but also feeling guilty that I had it, because what about the people that really have this? But yet I had all the symptoms as if I was being tortured like I had it. But the reason I brought that up with relation to the comedy is because I went to work that next day and I felt like something's changed. Within probably 3 weeks, I hadn't noticed. No more hypochondria. No more anxiety. Never came back since.
Even though you bombed on stage twice.
Yes.
Right. It should have been like the
Right. Like you should have felt
worst
but
experience
something
ever.
changed. What do you think it was?
changed for the better.
Yeah.
Well, this, I mean, I could go down a path. I still want to get back to Brian's question about linking the dots
We
of
have time.
speaking. But yeah, what changed, I think, and you and I have talked about this, Randy, is that was the day I started taking vitamin P. So not to go like way down a manhole, but have you guys ever heard of the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl? You got to check it out. It's a powerful book about a guy that was basically in the Holocaust, and everybody almost that was there with him died, and he lived, survived. He was a psychiatrist beforehand and after, and what he discovered is the reason that he made it is because he had meaning and purpose in his life. So then he started working with his patients afterward around that, and he didn't have to do talk therapy anymore. Didn't prescribe. It was all helping them find meaning in their life. So to me, I call vitamin P, which is purpose and passion. When you find that, when I say it's a vitamin you can't buy in the store, but when you take it, it changes everything. And so I feel what happened is I found what Viktor Frankl had that allowed him to survive in the Holocaust, which was meaning and a purpose. And I think it started with comedy. I'm not going to say that like it was like day one. Like I don't believe you can jump from. Most people can't jump from nothing. I don't have meaning to now I have purpose. I think there's a gateway, which is finding a passion and starting to pursue that passion, and eventually the purpose reveals itself. So I think what happened with the hypochondria is I started finding something that gave me meaning. And I know that sounds simple, and it's like I don't want to blow it off and say like it's a cure or anything because I'm not a doctor.
Yeah.
But I will say there's a lot of actually research to back it up. There's the blue zones. You may have both heard about
Yeah.
on Netflix.
Yeah.
The blue zones back up the fact. Actually, in the blue zones.
So let's explain what the blue
yeah.
zones are so people know what that is.
Yeah, so there's basically they found, I think it's 5, there's probably more now, but this guy named Dan Buettner was commissioned by by National Geographic to go and look at these places where people were living abnormally long. You know, like
Over
life
hundreds.
Yeah.
They're called centenarians.
Yeah, exactly. Into hundreds. And I think the oldest or the longest living one, I think it's in Okinawa, and their average life expectancy is 90 something. Average. So like what's that, 20 years more than the normal average? Yeah. And so they wanted to figure out what they were doing. Now, that's a whole discussion around the fact that they actually weren't doing anything specific, meaning they weren't going, I'm going to do this because it'll make me live longer. They were literally living a type of life that allows you to live longer. They live in communities, drink tea every day, always moving, gardening. Like it was what they were doing. But the fascinating part is the only one thing that overlaps between what he found of the 9 traits of the happiest people and the 9 traits of the longest living people is they live on purpose. So this goes back to that purpose thing. So Viktor Frankl found in studying people as a psychiatrist that made the difference. The blue zones have found that. And then Ikigai, which is it's a meaning in Japan, which is kind of like finding what you were called to do. They did that same study, and they studied the oldest living people in Japan as well, and they discovered the same thing. So I guess why I say this is I say I'm not a doctor. I can't prove it, but I've interviewed thousands, as you know, people asking about purpose. I've learned it myself, and those are 3 examples of studies that have kind of backed this up. So I do believe there's something to when you find what you're called to do, it's like taking vitamin P.
Absolutely.
But now, so you bomb on stage,
Right.
right?
Right.
Let's go back to that story.
Yeah.
Then you go to work the next day, and you feel different.
Yes.
How then do you start on the road of what it is you do now? At the end of that day when you were thinking about it, what was the next step that you took of like, God, I want to investigate this a little more and figure out what it is? Because I think that can be the sticking point for a lot of people. Like you feel something's different and you feel like there's a change, but then you're like, now what do I do?
Right.
Like what's the next step to take? And then I think people miss that step, and then they can easily fall back into waiting for that moment again, that light bulb to happen, that flash where it's like, oh, this is take action. So what was that thing for you? And what was it that pushed you to continue to do it? Because it's amazing to sit here with you now, knowing that is how it started. It's like, wow, that's a huge jump.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great point because I think about that sometimes now. If I wouldn't have taken the next step, which is going to answer your question from earlier about where's the connection.
Yeah.
If I wouldn't have taken that step, I do wonder now, would I be A, living the life I am now, or B, would I have fallen back? In other words, would comedy have kept me excited, or was it a momentary thing? Now, I ended up performing 700 shows over 9 years. So I didn't just walk away from comedy.
Oh, you did 700 comedy shows?
Yeah.
Okay.
My last one was at the Second City.
Did
which
you
is kinda
bomb
epic.
all 700?
No, I
No
got-
way.
I got-
that would just be masochistic.
That
But
would-
here I am.
That would be a cool TED Talk.
I feel
though.
great about myself.
Yeah.
right.
That's like Fight Club.
700 bombings, so what? Who cares?
Oh, I like that. That's a good Fight Club for comics.
Fight Club for comics.
I like it.
Yeah.
That's a good podcast name, too. So as far as, no, I didn't bomb all 700 times. It did get better. And what helped me was, at first I bombed. So here's the flip side. I bombed for over a year.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
okay.
now I would get like a, like that would be
Yeah.
a 5-minute set or 8-minute set.
Yeah.
Like one person. And so I will say, I don't know what kept pushing me, but I read this thing one time with Seinfeld. And in it, he said that he bombed for 2 years before he got 15 minutes of work. Now, 15 minutes is a lot of material, but it took Seinfeld 2 years.
Yeah.
A friend of mine who lives in Hollywood, Tracy McDonald, won Star Search in Canada, the only female comic ever. It took her 5 years to get her first headline show, to become a headliner. So I say this, when I started reading those interviews and interviewing people, what helped me keep going was the fact that I realized, oh, I'm probably not as good as
alone.
other people, but I'm still not as bad as I
Right.
think.
Right.
And so I kept going, and basically what happened, though, here's where the change happened. So I kept doing the comedy. The comedy eventually became a training ground for speaking. Originally, it was what I thought I wanted to do.
For
And
confidence.
For confidence.
Yeah.
And I learned more about speaking from comedy than I've ever learned in any program or masterclass since. But what happened was, about a year in, one of the comics invited me to go to a Tony Robbins show. So like a Tony Robbins event. And we were in the middle of watching him, and he said, "Can you believe he's getting paid this much money to do this?" And it was like, you know, they talk about those record scratch moments. It was like a,
You're like,
Wait
wait
a
a minute. How much?
how much? And I'm paying, like my thinking at the time was I'm paying $5 in gas to drive 9 comics who don't have cars to the comedy club and getting $10 from the door. So I'm up $5, and probably I'm not because of the wear and tear in the car. So I'm like, wait a minute. People get paid to do what I'm doing for free. And on top of that, they don't have to deal with hecklers, alcohol, nighttime, like all this. And,
Right.
and not only that, like as a comic in a small city or whatever, you're like going out and picking up the comics. It's like 4 hours of your night. Then we'd study the tape. We'd watch the comedy together and alone for like 5 hours for that 5-minute set to say, why didn't it work when I stepped on that tile? Like it was crazy. And then I'm like, people get paid. So what happened from there is I said, I want to learn more about that. And I went to the local community college, and I jokingly say, but it's true. It was appropriate. I had to sell them for a year on why I should teach their first ever sales course.
Interesting.
So part of me was like, if I was a better salesman, it wouldn't have taken a year.
Right, yeah.
But it was a business, you know, they call it a continuing care or after studies course.
Yeah.
Like people that are working, that their employer signs them up to go take this course. So I was teaching one on sales, and that's how I got started in speaking. And I started to feel, so this was the transition. I started to feel that I like this. This is something I could do, but I still wasn't there yet because teaching a course like that, I had no mentors. So I was doing what you think people would do, is like writing on the chalkboard, bullet points, like 1,000 bullet points on one slide, thinking I'm crushing it. And meanwhile, that wasn't speaking at all. I was basically teaching. Once I got my first booking, which came from that college, what happened was somebody said, we can't send all our staff. It was like 50 employees, $300 a head. We can't send all our staff. Can Corey come into our office? So I was like, oh my gosh, they're going to pay $15,000 to send them. If I charge $3,000, they're going to think I'm the hero. And so that's what I did. That was my first paid gig. And once I did that, I was hooked. So that was a long way to say that's
So
the gap.
Interesting.
So
That's
a comic
so
invited me
interesting. Yeah.
and said, and if he wouldn't have said, do you know how much he's getting paid to speak? Maybe again, if you believe in synchronicity, maybe I don't even know that's a thing. Maybe I don't know people get paid to speak. I didn't know Tony was getting paid all those years.
Right.
So that's the
Yeah.
bridge.
That is interesting.
It's an interesting bridge to wrap your head around, because it almost seems like there's a part of you that welcomes welcomes a battle, like welcomes that thing that most people run from, where it's like, oh, there's
Right.
yeah, there's a challenge to this, and people go, I can't deal with that. And you, it seems like you go, ooh, a challenge? Cool. Let's do this. Like I'll suck at something for a year and a half, 2 years. Like I will do what I'm not comfortable doing until I get comfortable doing it.
Did it ever make you feel alive? I mean, saying what you're saying, I'm wondering, because I'm flashing back to hypochondria and anxiety and being so uncomfortable on stage. You said you wanted to leave. You were trying to find the exit in the bathroom, sweat pouring down. Yet you did this and you bombed twice. And then the next day, people could see a difference in you. And it does feel like that Fight Club moment where he gets punched in the face, he gets beat up.
And he feels alive.
But he feels alive.
Yeah.
Was there something in there where you felt something different in your body and you survived and it was hard and you were like, I'm still here. I'm feeling good. Was there any connection there?
I think there was, but at the time I didn't see it. Meaning, like, I think there was inside of me, it was like, I can't believe I just did that. Oh my gosh, that's like, what am I thinking? And like, I just bombed horribly. How could I ever face anybody again? And at the same time,
was there also an excitement that came with that? Of like, I want to feel the rush of that again.
Yeah.
I thought, so yes, there was. And I think at the time I thought, I'm chasing that one laugh once. Now, here's what I found out since.
It's like my golf game. I would hit like a ball great one time, and then you spend the rest of your time chasing that, that swing and that feeling.
But I'll tell you one thing comics get even whenever they bomb horribly like I was doing and the train wreck. I didn't clue in this at the time, but people would come up and say it afterwards. And they would say stuff like, now this is kind of funny. They would say, thanks for helping me forget about my day. but basically you're saying because you were such a train wreck.
Yeah.
But there's something I think on a unconscious
Thanks for
level.
showing me that life is way worse than my day was.
I feel better because you feel worse.
that side. But what I also recognize is they weren't thinking about their bills. They weren't thinking about the crappy day. Like I was getting them out of their head because they were laughing at me, not with me, at me.
Right.
But I will say it's kind of funny. It's a weird moment to remember. But I remember this one moment. I was like, does this mean I've made it or I should walk away? But there was this article in the local newspaper.
Yeah.
And it was like the arts newspaper called The Coast. And they had an article about it. And they... The article, our group is called the Comedy Dogs, and it was DAWGS. So
of course
so
it
epic.
was.
Right.
Yeah.
And it said,
wait, what decade was this?
yeah. Well, and actually, it shouldn't have been that because it was like the 2000s. It was really a bad time. But it said Comedy Dogs are doggone terrible. Was the title of the article. But the funny part was...
You were like, look, Ma, I made it.
No, it was worse than that. Because they only picked on a couple of comics that are like... We had a big crew and like a troupe that we would... On certain nights, we'd have like 12 comics in a night. Uh-huh. And so we'd have different people and they only singled out maybe 3, but I think 2. I still have this article. I should actually post it somewhere. But it said one comic... I shouldn't even share this. Nervously talked about pubic hair for 5 minutes. Seriously, dude, it wasn't funny.
Oh no,
that's awesome.
And I don't like. I think I said one joke about soap and how come you can't get that hair off. It was something related to that.
And then it
but
just
in his
became
mind, it was like 5 minutes about pubic hair. But I love like to me when I read that. So your point about the excitement of it, I'm like, does this mean I've made it? They picked me out of the 10 or 12 horrible comics and singled my joke out.
Wait, so now now I really need you to connect the dots of how
we're getting further away than
you went from this. Yeah. Now it's like B is way up here, C's down here.
Bring it back around.
Right. Yeah. There's no straight line anymore. Like I expect to see like a puppy dog face or something at the end of all this. So how did all of this lead to what you like the confidence that you have now of being in front of people and truly enjoying helping people and helping them connect these dots in their life that they're having such trouble connecting?
Through talking, teaching people how to talk, how to design a talk, was
it the Tony Robbins experience? What was the thing? Was that the moment for you where you were like, ooh, there's like that rings true to me on some level? Like how How?
How? I get that. And also, have you ever heard of the 10,000 hour rule?
Yeah.
Outliers.
No.
Okay, you have to check that out too.
Okay.
It's a book by Malcolm Gladwell kind of made it famous. It was around before him, but it's a book called Outliers, depending.
Outliers.
Outliers. I think.
Outliers.
Outliers. So it's one of those things. And in the book, he talks about the 10,000 hour rule, and they've studied, like for example, the Beatles. I went to Liverpool recently. I actually got a John Lennon tattoo in Liverpool, and I was there.
Oh wait, is that 10,000 hours to become a master?
Yes.
or
Yeah.
something?
Yes.
Okay, I have heard that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
As you were talking about, you
10,000
said
hours.
the Beatles. I was like, oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, 'cause-
If you do something for that amount of time, they say that's the amount of time it takes to truly master something.
Absolutely. And I was talking to Pete Best, the original drummer, his nephew, and he was telling me that the big word around town is the Beatles were mediocre at best when they left for Hamburg, and they went there and played 8 days a week, according to their song, but they played 2 shows a day. They came back 2 years later. They were the best band in history. And it's because they put in the time. So here's the unsexy answer to your question, Brian. It's that I put in the reps. So I did those shows. I mentioned 700 shows. Well, I didn't get comfortable early on. When you said, what was it that clicked and made you comfortable? Well, it wasn't. What made me comfortable was being uncomfortable. And it took a while to get there. But basically, there was something that was pulling me to keep doing it. I think part of it's because I was recognizing that it was creating an impact for people. And then the one good thing is when I started out in speaking, I did get better somewhat quick. Like it took maybe a year before I was a solid speaker. But honestly, I think it was those reps. So like going to all those comedy shows, performing and bombing and realizing why I was bombing.
Right.
Because it's easier to deliver in a corporate setting than it is on this comedy stage. So I would figure out what wouldn't work on comedy and how can I bring that over to corporate. So
was that then the connection for you of like, okay, I'm writing material and I'm testing material, and some nights I bomb but I can now speak to people from a place of I found a healthy way to be in this experience? Like, what was the thing that crossed you from comedy to speaking to people and motivating people and helping people? Because that's a strange bridge in itself. Like that's usually people like that becomes their thing. Like I'm writing material and I want to be the best at this, and that's all that they do. They do comedy for the rest of their lives. You haven't.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what you're saying, which I'll explain where the connection is that I have left out, not intentionally. But it also explains why I walked away from comedy too, which is kind of ironic. But what the bridge is that I was in business at the same time. So I was in sales. I was selling photocopiers for a living. Anybody want me to get you a job doing that? Selling, like trying to convince a person why the yellow unsexy thing in the corner they never look at needs to be replaced with a whiter one.
Right.
That's what I did for a living.
Okay.
So I was doing that in the business world, in sales, at the same time as I was doing comedy. So what I had that most people probably didn't at the time is I had a business background and a comedy background. So I can say that almost without exception, every comic that I started with, by the way, that night of 7 staying, 6 are still performing comedy full-time now. Like those numbers are insane. So maybe he did the right thing, but none of them transitioned into corporate speaking. Like nobody that I actually performed with over the years that I know of has ever transitioned to corporate speaking. So it's a good question, because if nobody's done it, it's not the norm.
Right.
But I think what made me different was that I had that business background. So my early talks were about customer service, and my approach to it was how to get a standing ovation from every customer. And I would focus on how do the Rolling Stones, how do Prince get standing ovations? What are the 4 or 5 things they do that you can then take to a financial service provider or a Staples big box store?
Got it. So you were a public speaker more in that realm of like companies would be like, oh, you're so good at what you're doing. Please speak about it in front of other people and help motivate them. And then you were like, I can motivate people in a much better way than how to sell a fucking printer or something that's sitting in the corner.
Absolutely. Yeah. I know. It took a long time to get that.
There we go.
There it is. You
There
see?
we go.
Okay.
Do you want to know how that related, though, to me leaving comedy?
Of course I do. Totally.
Because what you said, you summed it up in a nutshell, and I didn't get that at the time, which is that people don't view comics the same as they view, quote unquote, a motivational speaker or a business speaker. So what happened was I was doing both, juggling them, and the comedy was getting me some gigs. What happened was I started foolishly doing corporate comedy and music. I'm a musician, so I was playing music. So I was going, and some people would pay me less than I was getting as a speaker, but like $1,500 as a comic. The guy that used to get $5 from the door to do corporate comedy, and it seemed like a dream at the time. But comedy is a lot different in a corporate environment than speaking is. So what happened was I did some gigs, and again, I'm going to say mediocre, but I wasn't like no laughs anymore. I was getting like added 45 minutes, 30 minutes of laughs. So I was delivering, but they were still like, yeah, it was okay. You could tell they weren't like, I wasn't like Chris Rock.
Right.
But what happened was this insurance company invited me. Well, actually, I was booked to do 8 talks with her. And that's pretty lucrative back then. 8 separate talks over a course of, say, 3 months. And I won't say her name, but basically she liked me a lot, and she knew I was doing comedy and music. And she said, Corey, our entertainer canceled. Can you fill in? And they want me to speak as the keynote and also comedy. And then she said, you know what? It'd be great if you played music when they're walking to the door. So what happened was...
God, you're a one-man band.
Yeah. As people in the entertainment business, you can see what's wrong with that picture.
Yeah.
I at the time, like, yeah, I'll help out.
Right. I can do all 3.
I can do that.
Sure.
So I'm at the front door playing, my original music, but also maybe like... How many roads must the man... Well, I wasn't singing Bob Dylan, but, I'm at the door playing. I'm like, hey, how's it going? And then as soon as the last word walked in,
guitar
throw the guitar
down, and then all of a sudden...
really quick. Yeah, change clothes, run up to the front of the stage.
Karate
like, hey.
belt, all of a sudden you're like teaching board breaking. Yeah.
So how about those grapes? Like then I'm doing comedy for like 45 minutes, and then they do something, break and all the stuff, and then they're like, okay, now our keynote speaker. And so what happened was that all still wasn't that bad, but there was a CEO/chairman in the room who wasn't even active in the company anymore. There were 250 people. People were coming up later and saying, loved your comedy. I loved that joke. And by this point, I was pretty seasoned as a comic. Oh, I love that. Oh, I loved your music. And I incorporated music where I would do like parodies of songs and stuff. Oh, I loved all that. And then she reached out to me a couple days later and said, the chairman didn't like one of your jokes. He won't tell me which one, but he's decided that we're canceling your bookings. And she goes, Corey, this sucks. I don't want to do it. Anyway, so it was like $50,000 gone because of this corporate gig that I had done. And the joke that he cringed on, I can tell it. This joke is not even that dirty, so it surprised me that's the joke. But I still remember it. I said, how many people here have ever gone on a blind date or met somebody online and went on a date? And then I'd say, I went on one recently, and I'll tell you why I had to end the date. Halfway through the date, she touched me and said, I'm not sure if you've ever met anybody like this, but I have a thing called scurvy. And so my head's like, scurvy? How does somebody have scurvy in, this century and what have you? And then, so she told me how she got it. She said she was eating a steady diet of gummy bears and popcorn. And I said, yeah, but how did you know you had scurvy? And she said, well, I noticed one of my toenails had turned color, and I touched it and it fell off. So I realized I had to break up with this girl because I realized the last thing she touched turned color and fell off. And that's just not a risk I'm prepared to take. That was the joke that got me canceled. That got me canceled.
Wow.
Before cancel culture, that got me canceled.
So stupid.
Wow.
I saw it, but I saw him go. Like he made this face at that joke.
They were really upset.
He was. Wow. But the rest of the audience loved it. They're like, I loved your scurvy girl joke.
Wow.
So to your point about not making the connection, that was the day I said, comedy's done, I guess. Because I have to choose one, and speaking was more of my passion. And you can impact people in a different way as a speaker if you're already doing it. Yeah. It's just a different gig altogether, and you can actually get paid. you're not starving week to week.
Right. So tell us more about vitamin P, because I think this is so important for people to understand, when you talk more about meaning and purpose and passion and what a significant role it plays in your life. You've interviewed, thousands of people, hundreds of thought leaders. What is this all about?
Well, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that I've discovered that these people live on purpose. So one of the things that I used to speak on often was, what are the common traits of the top thought leaders? So in other words, I would study thought leaders and say, what do I notice that they share? And the most common trait by a mile was that they've discovered their purpose and they live every day on purpose. And so in discovering that, I started really diving deeper and studying it. And I noticed, again, they take what I call vitamin P, but they wake up every day and say, I have a purpose, and this is what it is, and I'm excited to do it. Now, how they do that's different. Some write goals, some write affirmations, some say, here's what my day is going to look like. At the end of the day, here's what my day looks like. And I think some just wake up and go, okay, let's do it. Bob Dylan had a great quote like, I don't know why I'm referencing Bob Dylan a lot today, but he had a great quote that said, if a man, I'll add in, or woman, wakes up every morning and goes to bed at night, and in the hours they're awake in between, they do that which they love. He said that is what success is. Well, to me, that's also living on purpose. So for me, I've discovered that people that seem, and I'll go one step further, people that seem to be sick less often, they seem to age better, meaning they look younger. People that seem to have more energy longer. People that people want to be around because they have a passion about them and what have you. All those people I've discovered, out of all of them, most of them are taking vitamin P. And I think like the acting world, we look at the acting world and look how many actors are still going strong. Like how old's Clint Eastwood, right? Like they're still going strong and seem to have a jump in their step. And I believe there's something there that they're doing what they were called to do.
Yeah, just like the people at the Blue Zones, right? That they're living on purpose. So these thought leaders, a lot of very successful people living on purpose. So where does someone start? Because I know I talk a lot about purpose, and a lot of people are like, but what does that mean? What does that look like? Where does someone start in terms of trying to discover their purpose if they don't feel it right now?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And, I'm happy later on to talk about what thought leaders nobody shares that thought leaders, in my opinion, struggle with. Because so remind me to talk about what they struggle with in terms of the next syndrome. So I'll talk about that.
The next syndrome.
Yeah, but it's something that I've been really passionate about lately because it's something we're not sharing. And I think we should start talking about it. But as far as finding passion, so purpose and passion, you hear that I use them interchangeably. But to me, purpose is why you're doing it. Passion is what you're doing. So the what is podcasting, acting, speaking, comedy, photography. That's the what, like what career, if you want to look at it that way. And so what I've discovered is most people, as I had said earlier, can't just jump from nothing to purpose. And I think purpose, by the way, I know it's just all wording, but I think purpose is something we uncover as well. So you said discover, we uncover it. I believe that. I don't think it's something we find. I think it's something we already have. I think it's already there, but we got to chip away to find it. And so what I have seen is, I say passion is the gateway to purpose. So figuring out what you're passionate about. So when I happy accidented into comedy, but that was me discovering a passion, which led to a purpose. And I've worked with a lot of people, helping them, and I'll tell you kind of the exercise, but working on an exercise that allows you to start finding a passion. And what I found is when people engage in that passion for months and months, eventually they're like, aha, this is why I'm doing this. This is why I like this. So the passion test I take people through is just to sit down, it's so basic, and write on a piece of paper, or if you want, computer, but write on a piece of paper, here's some of the things I love doing. And it could be, here's what people say I'm good at. Here's what I think I love doing. A big one is, here's what I did as a kid, and people told me to stop doing it because it's not practical. So you wanted to go to clown college and your parents were like, that's not practical, go to Stanford. Right. Why did you want to go to clown college?
Right.
What was in clown college?
What was in being a clown that felt so good?
Yeah.
And it could be entertaining, and like meaning entertaining people. And that could lead you to discovering, I wanted to be an actor. And then becoming an actor. Like it could be, I mean, again, the bridge might not be that short, but it's so
the
making a list.
The bridge is there though.
It is there. Yeah. And I think it's just sitting down and asking those questions. What would I do if I won the lottery and I went to an island to retire? What would I do when I came back? Because most people, I think they would want to stay on the island forever, and then they would get bored.
Yep.
So make a list of those things, and people will come up with lists like, it could be, so it's funny because some people say, well, you can't put foolish things on there like knitting because you can't make a living at knitting. And I disagree, because I was saying the other day to somebody, I think you could make a living at knitting, not just make a living doing it, but today, the world we're in, you can start a TikTok channel, invite celebrities to knit with you and drink together and get hammered knitting. Right. Yeah. That would bring in viewers.
Yeah.
So you can make a living, I think, at doing anything. I don't think it's, by the way, about making the living. Like people say, well, how can I make money doing that? I'll say, well, it's not your passion, if that's your first question. But I think if you do it, you can find the path to making money at it. So again, back to the list, I would make a list, photography, whatever that comes up on that list. And then what I do is I reorder it and say, what is the thing that gets my mojo working the most? And what's the thing I could ditch if I had to? Because I'm all about efficiency. And I start with the one that feels like it's the biggest one for me. And then what I do from there is, let's say it was comedy. Let's take a really hard one. I wouldn't just jump on a stage because I decided it was the first on my list. To take action, what I would do is say, okay, I'm going to invite a comic out for lunch. I'm going to watch HBO, a comedy special, and take notes. I'm going to go to a stand-up comedy workshop. I'm going to be tricked into performing stand-up on a stage. I'm going to do those things. And then what you do is you make a list of maybe 4 things that are baby steps. And I'll go one step further. I give myself a reward for each one of those I achieve. That pushes me forward, like the carrot dangling, like you said, chasing that one shot again.
Yeah.
And then what I find happens is you try for a few months and you find out pretty quickly if it's really a passion.
Right.
If it is, then eventually the purpose gates open up. Now, I've had people say, well, yeah, I tried it for 3 months and I found out, even though I enjoy doing it, it's not a passion. Who cares? You just did something you wrote on a list that you love for 3 months. You had a life adventure.
Right.
Yeah.
So that, to me, that's kind of the starting. The purpose side is a little more intangible because I think it eventually uncovers itself in a lot of ways.
Yes. You know, it's unfortunate because I think when people talk about passion, I hear this all the time too, right? This, well, I used to dance, but, you know, I danced till I was 13, 14. I don't know
Nothing
why,
ever
but
came of it.
nothing ever came of it. You know, I had to get serious. I had to grow up. But when it comes to passion, it's not always about making it a career. Like you said, it's not always about being successful or making money. I mean, I see it with clients. So go dance.
Right.
If you haven't done it, if it's something that lights you up, if it makes you happy, go do it. But somehow they'll be in a dance class or a dance studio, and it's doing the action that then lights them up, that then gets them to have a different thought. And while they're in dance class, they have a thought of their next thing that they're doing, but they wouldn't have discovered that if they didn't take the action that used to light them up.
Well, I mean, I'll flip the switch and ask you, Brian, in the acting side.
Yeah.
There must have been people along the way that said, this is a foolish path. I shouldn't say there must have been, but I'm curious if there was people along the way that said,
honestly, no.
no.
But you started so
I started
young,
so young.
that
I
you
was
had
9
some
when I
success.
started.
And you had support from your parents.
I had tons of support from
That's
my
a huge
parents.
thing.
I had tons of support from the people that were around me. So yeah, luckily I wasn't discouraged because I've spoken about this before. It took, a good solid year and a half of just constant no's and no's and no's and it not working before I finally hit a yes. And then I was like, oh, that's how you hit a yes.
And that was at age 9 you were experiencing those no's?
I was at 9. Yeah. So it wasn't until like 10 and a half that I finally booked.
That feels like that would be tough at 9, experiencing those no's.
But it wasn't for me because it was a passion thing. I didn't have that sense at the time of like, this has got to be a career. This has got to be the money.
I have to make it.
This has got to be the thing that works or I'm fucked. Like, how am I going to pay the rent? How am I going to, I didn't have that pressure on me. So
that's kind of a blessing at that age, right?
was a
I'm
total
so
blessing.
happy you just shared that, though, because if people could look at things like that more, I'm passionate. I really want to do it. I don't even care if I get no's. Let me just see how far this goes.
Yeah.
As adults, more people look at that. Oh, I don't want to do this because it's not going to work out. It's not going to be successful. Therefore, I don't even want to do it.
I think people don't realize that you can have more than one thing that fills the bucket for you. It's like, okay, this is the thing that I'm doing right now because I make money doing this. And so it's allowing me to live and survive. But then I can also have this passion thing and it doesn't need to hold the same weight right now. Hopefully, eventually, it fills up enough where the thing you're doing just for money, you can let go of because this is now supplying enough of that.
Right.
And I've had that conversation on set with people. Like, I've worked with people where they're like, I don't feel, in doing this show or doing this thing, I don't feel like I'm being an artist and I'm doing the thing that I'm passionate about. And I constantly have to say to them, listen, this thing, buy your fucking house with it. Like, live with this. And then go be an artist and be passionate on your downtime from this.
Yep.
But be thankful that you have this one thing that can power your passion and can keep that going. But people don't realize they can have both things at the same time, that they're not mutually exclusive. You're either all artist and all this, or you're all 9 to 5 and you're all business and you can have both of them. You can balance the two of them and you can fill up the cup with one and the other. It can be the two things living simultaneously, harmoniously.
Yep.
Well, I think people too think, I don't have the energy to do both. I'm already working, what have you. The irony is that if you go do that thing you're passionate about, it'll give you more energy.
It fuels the
fuels
other thing. Yeah, absolutely.
So true.
There's a great story that backs up the whole cliche of if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And
Which
it's from
is
an
what
actor.
my dad says all the time.
He says it.
That is the quote that he, like, hands down will give more than anything. If you do something you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And I was always like, I didn't get it at first, but now it's like, it's true. When I'm on a set, I can be there for 15 hours out of a day, but I love doing it. And I can't wait to wake up the next morning and go back to doing it some more. Like, as tired as I am and as tough as it is, I love it. I love doing it.
Well, it's funny because the story I was going to share is about this guy named, you may or may not know, but John Dunsworth was his name, his real name. He passed away a couple of years ago, but he was an actor on the show Trailer Park Boys. You guys heard of Trailer Park Boys? It's like these
I have not.
guys in a trailer park that just go crazy.
I did
and
hear about that.
smoke pot and drink, and it's just like a crazy show about people in a trailer park that's filmed like a reality show, even though it isn't. But this character, his name was Mr. Leahy, was the name of his character, and he just drank all the time. Kind of ironic. You go out for for a lunch or supper or what have you, and everybody comes over to buy him a rum and coke, and he doesn't drink. So if you go hang out with him, everybody like at the table gets free drinks because he goes like this as soon as the people leave. But John Dunsworth told me this story one time. He was on the set of a show called Haven on the Sci-Fi Network, and he was working, and they had a bunch of teenagers this one day for whatever reason. And at the end of the day, it's like 12, 14-hour day acting, and he's like, what are we going to go do now? And he was like 66 at the time. And they're like, what are you on, old man? And he goes, let me tell you a story, kids. And basically he talked about how he's been an actor for 45 years. And he said, honestly, I've never worked a day of those 45 years. So the cool part about what he said was, how would I get tired? Because what you define as work, I've never done it. I don't even know what that is.
Right.
And he said, so every day I do what I love and I'm never ever physically working. How could I get tired? That's why I have all kinds of energy. And I thought, to me, that was the perfect story to define you never work a day in your life.
It's amazing. Yeah. It's true.
So I'm going to flip it to you, Randy, as far as, because I'm thinking that I can see the opposite scenario. You shared with me recently in an interview how you, there was kind of an encouragement for you to go down the path of acting. Did you have the opposite scenario where it was like, what are you thinking not going down the acting path? I feel like you would get that.
I remember the best was I was moving to Portland, Oregon, and it was the last time I was going to this pet store to buy dog food for my dog. And I think the young kid behind the counter, he was probably 22 or something. I can't believe I'm even saying young kid at 22. Just had a moment there. So we were talking, we'd always chat, and I think he was an aspiring actor. And I said, this is the last time I'm going to see you. I'm leaving. I'm going to Portland, Oregon. And he said, you what? What do you mean? And I said, what do you mean? What do I mean?
Right, yeah.
And he said, how could you leave Los Angeles? I mean, first of all, it's Los Angeles. He was really enamored by Los Angeles. But also, I think because of my background and being born in Hollywood, he couldn't compute that I would leave Hollywood. And that's the first time I was like, whoa, that's weird. And I think there were some people that saw a natural progression that knew, oh, this is fitting for you being a life coach and, moving away. But for other people, it was a really big shock. Like, why are you giving up this I don't know, like this thing that you were born into?
What most people would consider a dream.
Right. And
like, man, you're living everybody's dream. Why would you want to give
probably that up? In a way like, oh, it's so easy. Why would you give up something easy to go and, become a life coach and probably not succeed or struggle or start over? Yeah. And this is the honest to God truth. I didn't know if I was going to succeed. I didn't look at it as I need to be the next Tony Robbins. I didn't have that vision in my mind. I just knew that I took entertainment at the time as far as I could take it, and what I got from it at that point wasn't feeding me. In fact, it was draining me.
Yeah.
And I wanted to live with purpose. And that was sort of my second chance when I was like, I have a second chance here to live the way that I want. And my guiding light was I want to feel purposeful, and that was making a difference.
Acting
in
was
people's
never
lives.
your passion. Like that wasn't.
I don't think
you wouldn't get to the end of a day, and because you've talked about it before, like it was never the connection with people that you were really needing in your life and feeling like fulfilled by. So I would assume then you'd get to the end of a day and you'd be exhausted and you'd be like, man, this is not filling me up. It's not giving me enough.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. There was a period of time where I absolutely loved it, and I'd be excited to go back the next day. It felt creative, easy. But at some point, I started to hit some roadblocks, like we do in everything, and I didn't want to fight through those roadblocks. When I kept getting no's, when things felt hard, I was like, I don't just want to keep hitting up against that. I want to go my own way. And I'll be honest and say this, that purpose and passion guided me to become a life coach. But there were many times along the way that it would start to feel like work. And that was the red flag for me, or the alert to say, you need to change something in your business or the way that you're doing this because you're not being fed. And so, like when Brian reached out to me to do this podcast, I was just saying a few months before that, I never thought I was going to be sitting in an office 8 hours a day. And there's some travel, doing talks and different things, but predominantly I am sitting in front of a computer screen working with people all over the world, which I absolutely love. But the sitting for so long,
I need more.
I need more of a different scene. My brain needs to see something different. And that was answered. He was like, hey, we're going to do this. And I was like, yeah. So it's just when it becomes
it's crazy too to think that. So we did season 1 of it Zoom.
Right.
So
right.
he was still sitting at his desk doing the
right.
Like the location didn't change at all. Just like it was a different process. Cut to now season 2, he's flying down here every month, and and it's a whole change of scenery. It's a whole different experience. It's amazing how the situation evolved to fit
right.
what it is you needed from it in the beginning without asking for it. You never pitched in the beginning like, hey, can we do this differently because I'd like to be able to travel a little bit more. Like it just naturally progressed that way.
Yeah.
Just to finish that off, I think it's fascinating that your story could be like that. What we just talked about could be like a movie or an SNL skit about the idea that your parents are like, no, you don't go and do that practical job. You're going to be doing acting. That's where the security is.
Yeah.
Like stand-up comedy, right? No, so you stay with stand-up comedy. That's where the secure jobs are. You just don't hear
It's
those
so
things.
funny. Who would have ever thought that acting would have been something that would be more of the, no, you should sit and do entertainment.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny.
So interesting.
that is a
Yeah.
flip. So back to this. So you said that purpose can't be, it's not really discovered. You said it's sort of uncovered, right?
Yeah.
What did you find? Because you've had an evolution from talking and doing more motivational speaking to writing books. I know your last book, Enlightened Passenger. What was the evolution to get you to the book? And then if you could share one or two things from the book, like the thing about coincidences and whatever else you want to share, I think would be really helpful for the listeners.
Yeah. So, wow, the evolution, because I look back at it now and it feels like it wasn't a lot of time, but it's, we're talking 18, 20 years. Like I'm talking the evolution from like that first night we were talking about with like the first stand-up comedy night, that's 22 years ago. So this evolution has been a long journey. But one of the things is I feel like what happened for me, and it took me a long time to get this, is flexibility with the whole thing was a huge thing. Like I was trying to rush it early on. I was like, this needs to happen next week. And when I finally realized that it was happening, just not on my time, that helped the evolution. So there were, Steve Jobs did this talk years ago called Joining Up. I don't think it was called this. People named it Joining Up Your Dots. And what they were able to figure out is the things that he dreaded the most, like when he got let go of it from Apple, turned out to be the things that actually brought him back to Apple as the biggest shareholder, led him to releasing the iPhone, iPad, and everything we see today. But at the time, he was miserable. I think he said he was depressed, like he thought about taking his life. And that ended up becoming one of his most important moments. And so I had a lot of those moments along that evolution where it's like what you just talked about, where you said, well, I think I need to get out of the sitting of 8 hours a day and always in the same place. And then you didn't say, let's start doing it live. It just evolved that way. Well, that's what happened for me through all that period. So I can go back and there's different moments when, okay, this pushed me in this path. So for example, just to give you a real world example, I launched my first podcast 18 years ago. Like, this is like early days of podcasting.
Pioneer.
Well, and I didn't know what I didn't know. I think sometimes ignorance is bliss, as they say. I didn't know you couldn't take on sponsors when you had no listeners. That never occurred to me because I had a newspaper where I had advertisers. So I just said, well, you're advertising with me now. I'm going to make this show great. Why don't you come over here and advertise with me? So I just sold like about $10,000 in sponsorship a month. Now it was recurring. I signed them up for a year each from day one of my podcast. So people are like, what do you mean you have 6 figures in revenue from sponsorship and you've never had a listener? And Jack Canfield was my first guest. Like, wow. I shouldn't have been able to get him on the show. So that stuff never occurred to me. But when I say that things push me in certain directions and I listened, well, I had a newspaper in a small town and I recognized the newspaper world was dying. Now, interestingly, my paper was growing. And to this day, there's still another paper that started 10 years before me that's still thriving. I could have thrived, but there was a ceiling. And I didn't want a ceiling. Like, I want to expand, and there was nowhere else to expand. So the next evolution for me was I'm doing these great interviews with people, and nobody's hearing them. It was all in print. Well, maybe I should look at this whole podcasting thing people are talking about. In fact, we were talking online radio at the time, we were calling it. But I should look into this thing. And so that's what pushed me in that direction. Then I got those sponsors, and I did that for 5 years with the sponsors. We kept like 85% of them for 5 years. And then one day I'm like, I don't like this because our show was an hour and a half, 7 guests, but we pre-recorded. It wasn't live. Pre-recorded. We'd have like comics, like we'd have a 5-minute comedy break, music break. Like, it was like a variety show.
Wow.
And I had a producer I was paying every month. And so all these things were involved in it. And so when I really looked at it seriously as a speaker, I can go out and do a booking or two and pay for this whole thing. Why am I managing sponsors? And then on top of that, I had to book the sponsors on the show sometimes as guests. I had to they'd be like, I didn't like this episode or this segment. So then I'd have to worry about that in the future. So I eventually said, I'm stripping it all down. I'm going to one guest a show, have a person I know that can produce it, get rid of the sponsors. I wind it down, fulfilled all the agreements. But what I'm getting at is at some point I realized the universe said to me, no more sponsors, no more 75,000 guests an episode. Like, you need to change this. And I did. And so that was where I think the evolution came, is one thing kept leading me to another. And so if I kind of go really quick from there to today, I did my first TED Talk. I was already still a speaker. 18 probably years, I was a full-time speaker, and I always had a side hustle. So I couldn't just do one thing. We talked earlier, like, I always had to have a passion project beside the passion project.
Yeah.
And so I was doing those things, and they kept evolving. So first it was the newspaper. Then it was the podcast. Then it was interviewing thought leaders for video. And I kept evolving that stuff. While I was doing that, I was also teaching about finding your purpose, some of the stuff we're talking about. So then I wrote a book called The Book of Why and How. It took me like 4 years to write it by the time I actually put it out. And that opened up a whole new gate of things, because in the book I was talking about getting outside your comfort zone, finding your why. One big one for me was how to do all this stuff, impact lives, and still be able to sleep at night. Because that was a struggle. I saw a lot of people that were like posting the Facebook ad, hey, I can get you this Ferrari that they don't even own. They're taking a picture of it in somebody's yard and then posting it. And so I was like, I don't want any of that kind of stuff. So I basically kept evolving, teaching people in those different areas, interviewing all these thought leaders and learning from them. And then what happened was I started speaking on what I was learning about what these thought leaders do differently. And I was still doing the podcast. And eventually that started leaning into the work I ended up doing with individuals, with the book writing and everything around helping people. So 2 things I do now is helping people share their message. So on stages, on platforms, in books. And then the other side is my own stuff, which was, how do I help people? You talked about the book. How do I help people realize that synchronicity is a real thing? How do I help people understand that when I've interviewed these thought leaders, this is a harsh thing to learn, but most of them say no way more than the average person. How do I show people this in a delicate way and teach this? So I know that's trying to condense a lot of stuff into one thing, but it was really just everything led to the next thing. And it kept pushing me. Like, I feel like I was going down a road and it was like, you can go this road or this road. And it just pushed me in the roads I was supposed to take. Kind of like, again, going back to that point about everything opening up for you. I feel things opened up for me, but I'd be lying to say I didn't spend 20 years getting those things to open up. So in other words, it's easy to blow it off, say it just led me down this path, but I had to put in a lot of work. And in fact, I'm doing a post tomorrow. I said, how many people want to know a secret to any success I might have had? If I get enough yeses, I'm going to post it. And I'll tell you what the post is going to be about, is I'm going to share some of the things I've been fortunate enough to have happen. And then at the end of it, I'm going to say, the secret was consistency. I kept doing this for 20 years, just like acting, right?
Yeah.
Like imagine if you did the one show, you did 90210 and then said,
Done.
Accomplished it. And then you were sitting across from Brian and saying, how did you do this all? Well, it would be a different answer than I'm sure saying, okay, well, I kept auditioning. I met somebody around town. They invited me to go do this audition and what have you. So I don't know if that's a full answer, but it was really an evolution that kept pushing me down different paths.
Yeah.
But I had to lean into the nudge. And I know you mentioned synchronicity. That was one of the biggest things, I think, Randy, that really changed everything for me. Is recognizing synchronicity was the thing. I mean, we talked about how I didn't want to be on a stage. We didn't even talk about the fact that I'm a recovering spiritual skeptic. Like, I didn't believe in all this stuff. I thought this stuff was hocus pocus. My mom used to take me for tarot readings and tea leaf readings when I was 8. And I'm like, my mom practices witchcraft. Like, and my wife is a shamanistic healer and a Reiki master. Like, I was totally not down that path. And again, I won't go into all the details about how I got down that path. But for me to get to the point where I believe in synchronicity, it was a big journey. And so, but it changed my life, and I started listening to the nudges, and that changed my whole life. So that's why I want people to know if things are happening for you, and if you really, really pay attention, you can make decisions. Like I told you about a guest I think you guys should have, and I won't say his name because I don't want people to go after him and get him to connect them with these people, but I did an interview with him. Well, the interview happened because I was supposed to interview somebody else in Miami, a UFC fighter. He gave me the wrong address. Then he said, no worries, champ, I'll wait here for you. It was going to be an hour and a half later. I drove there. I got a ding on my phone. I pulled over to see if it was him. Sure enough, he said, I was 5 minutes away. He said, sorry, pal, had to bail. So now all of a sudden, 3 hours are gone. I had only flown in for 2 interviews. It was one of them. And I was like, I'm going to the beach in Miami to make lemonade. My friend Tiffany messages and says, Corey, remember I told you about that guy that lives in Toronto? Well, him and his wife just split up. He just moved back to Miami. Aren't you in Miami? I said, yeah. She goes, do you want to interview him? I said, can he even make that happen? Like, would it work today? Instead of going to make lemonade, I said, well, let me lean in. Why did she message me? And she reached out to him and he said, I had 3 interviews. They all got canceled. So he said, yeah, I can make the whole afternoon work. Wow. I went to interview him in a music studio. Afterward, he said, who can I help you with? And I said, like I told you, I don't want to abuse the relationship. He said, well, how about I'll send you a message if I think of someone? I said, sounds good. And he messaged me and said, how about Les Brown and Bob Proctor? And like I said to you, I said, yeah, if it has to be them, I guess so. But my point is, think about that whole
giants in the personal development space.
Yeah, and if you look at that whole path, it was a synchronicity. She said, do you want to interview him? I said, yes. I leaned in. I could have went to the beach and made lemonade. So again, I think that those nudges, or some people call them God winks or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing that kind of propelled me down this path.
Fascinating.
I've been in a place recently where it's like I really try and say yes to as many things as I possibly can. Like if the time works out, and it's like, just say yes, because you never know what the actual purpose of that situation is. Sometimes it is literally just you go and do the thing and it's done. And then other times you go and you do it and you go, man, I met this person and this one that steered me in a different direction than I was expecting. And it opens up some new avenue and some new set of doors that you never even knew you wanted to check out, until all of a sudden you're in it and you go, man, this is amazing.
Yes.
I'm so glad this happened.
Yeah,
but you have to be willing to say yes to things.
You have to be willing to say yes, and the yeses are so important as door openers, getting out of your comfort zone, moving past things that you might avoid. And on the flip side, I think no's are just as important, because so many people have trouble saying no.
Sure.
That they don't realize, I'm going to hurt someone's feelings, I'm going to let them down. But if they're really truthful with themselves, no, I don't want to go to that party tonight. Or no, I just can't be there for you on that day. But what happens is saying that no to someone allows them to then reach out to someone else. Maybe it's someone they haven't connected with, and they reconnect and they get something totally different that they need. So it's like, it's not only helps you, but
it's being conscious and living with purpose in those moments. Going, okay, what is, like, really stepping back for a second and going, okay, so normally I would say no to this because it seems like it's more work than I'm used to putting in. So yeah, I'm absolutely going to say yes to this. And then the things where you just guiltily kind of say yes to instead step back and go, I don't want to go do that. Like,
right.
This isn't, like you said, I don't want to go to this party. Like, I don't want to have to get dressed and get ready for, like, it's just like my gut is telling me this is not something that I should or need to be doing. And then you say no to those things, and it's just as, it's finding a different balance of yes and no.
Mm-hmm.
You, like, realizing I'm going to step out of my comfort zone and I'm going to say yes to the things I normally say no to because it just seems like more work than I'm willing to put in. And then I'm going to say no to the things I normally say yes to because I'm going to step out of that realm of worrying about what other people are going to think of it. And I'm going to do these things for myself. It's finding the purpose in those answers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's a confusion sometimes when I talk about the power of no. I'm not saying don't say yes. It's,
right. You're
like,
not
it's your
saying,
point.
Right. You're not saying just try saying no to everything.
Right.
It's like, it's not,
right.
it's
not a
not
blanket.
as simple as that.
It's not a blanket no.
Right.
It's basically, and you know, Randy, from the book, I talk about writing a mission statement. Well, the mission statement could simply be, I want to be the guy who does these 5 things. That's what I do. And I look at those 5 things and then I decide no or yes based on that. So I still say yes a lot.
Yes isn't the movie Yes Man. It's not just literally saying yes to everything that's asked of you. You know,
it's a good point, and it's important for people to understand that, because I think sometimes people hear that and they're like,
it's
say
finding
yes to
the
everything.
purpose behind saying yes and no to things, and steering your life in a certain direction, in a direction that it hasn't, like, classically been on up until that point, but being willing to fucking shake it up a little bit and go, okay, you know what? I'm going to try some new things.
Yes.
I'm going to experience some new things, because you never know what's going to come out of those.
Yep.
I heard a great Richard Branson quote. I mean, who knows these quotes sometimes if it's really him, but that's where I heard the quote came from. And he said, say yes to everything that I love doing, and then figure out how to do it later. And I love the distinction of that I love doing.
Yeah,
that's
a good
to
one.
me the difference maker.
That's a really good one. Ooh. Okay, we're gonna go to the after show.
Okay.
One question that I wanted to ask you that I think will be really helpful for people. There's a lot of people listening that feel strongly, that have a message, that want to make an impact, that they want to write a book. They want to do a project. They want to help people in some way. What would you say to that person who has a message? What would you want them to know, since you help people with talks and messages and projects? What would you say?
Well, this is tough because I'm on 2 trains of thought here. On one side, I do believe everybody has a story. And even everybody has a story that somebody needs to hear. But this is the part to it. If you're not the perfect messenger for that story, then you probably need somebody to help you dial in that message.
Find the messenger, or
or become the messenger, but figure out how to become.
Right.
Because that's it, and that's a tough thing to say. It's because I don't want anybody to think they shouldn't share their story, but I do think there are times you can share your story and it gets lost because, for example, I won't say a name, but I know somebody in my life who's what I call a yellow personality, super social. And their story includes, like, and then he was wearing a purple shirt, and they get into all the weeds of the story,
and they lose people.
And so figuring out what the core message of your story is, I think, is super important. And how to do that. I'll give one exercise of how people can do that. I used to struggle with oversharing, and I used to send emails. I remember this is the prime example when I sold those white photocopiers and sometimes yellow, because we sold used ones too. I had this branch manager, and I used to send him the email like this, asking for a lower price. You know, like the client, real situation where they want to buy 5 instead of 1. Of course, you're going to give them a better price. But I would give all the reasons, like, and then the secretary said this, and then their daughter went to this school. And, like, I would go through all this. And he would reply for a while, and eventually this one day, he must have had too many emails from everybody. But he sent it out, and he included my name to make sure they knew it was me, and said, if anybody else sends me another email like this in the future, you're never getting a better price ever again.
Wow.
And I had to do some work. I had to realize I'm telling too much of the story. And he literally is like, just tell me what price they need or what price you think they need, why you think
Lay
they
it
need
on
it.
me quick
and
and
then,
simple, and then let me make the decision.
And he was getting like 400 emails a day.
In order to do that, though, you really have to concentrate it and distill it down to what is the purpose? What is the essence? What do I want to leave people with? What do I want to share?
And this is the exercise. So what I did to change that is I literally wrote out what I want to share with people for the next little while. And this is wild. And by the way, I had to do this for articles too, because you'll want to write an article and they'll say it needs to be 500 words. And you write it without looking at the word count and you're like, it's 1,200.
Right.
And you can actually, not always, but you can actually get that 1,200 word article to 500 words and still have it make it make sense and have more punch.
Make more sense.
Yeah, more sense and
With
have more
less
punch.
words. Yeah.
And so what I did was I would start writing it down and saying, what words can I remove and it all still makes sense? And that's what I started doing, my emails. And I would keep trimming away. And I would get the emails down to this from that. And he was like, thanks, Corey. This is so much easier.
Just trimming the fat.
Yeah.
That reminds me of that quote. Was it Mark Twain that said, I would have written you a shorter letter if I had time?
Yes, it was. I just heard that for the first time recently. In the last 6 months, I heard that.
I love it because it's speaking to that.
Yeah. So what happened though is I think it's like the muscle, like we talked about the 10,000 hour rule.
Yeah.
I think taking that exercise, if you try that, eventually you just automatically put in less words. Yeah. And you start getting to become a better storyteller.
You start realizing like the simpler way of saying something and still being as effective.
Yes, I have something to work on, Corey. All right. Game on.
It's one of my biggest pet peeves is when I receive a bunch of emails from somebody and they're these like long books because I don't want to read through them all.
Right.
I don't have time. It's like, listen, what do you need? Like, tell me
I
exactly
often wonder
what
with
you
some
want.
of my text messages. I'm like, is that too long?
We'll talk about it later. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about it.
I still battle it sometimes. I'm not going to lie. It's still a challenge, but I've worked on it.
Let's get into after the show.
Yeah, Corey, thank you.
Thank you all for watching, for listening. Go to oldishpodcast.com. We hope to see you all over there. We're going to continue this conversation some more. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching if you were. And let's get into it.
Hey, if you're going through something right now, if you need additional support, then please reach out to me at randyspelling.com/help or go to my Instagram at randyspelling. Thanks.